Please let us have a moment of silence. The man known as Kazuo has retired from Sony. As we are here today to remember his work, his commitment, his everlasting hardships of trying to get Sony out of the black hole, my prediction of 5 years has come to light. I told y'all I'd give it 5 years. You guys laughed at me, you guys made fun of me, but the new legal is still standing. And my prediction tastes so sweet. And as we embark on this prediction, it didn't just come by of just talking off the head, talking sideways, talking greasy, or just talking just to make statements. It came from actual research, listening, watching throughout the years that go way back. And I am here today to talk about why this has come today and why we see Sony in the state that it is now. It is very interesting. I want to welcome everybody to Di-RREC Gaming. It's the new legal, and I'm doing a new game. It's a new day. The question is, where is Sony heading? It is called forecasting, people. When you think of companies, you have to think of the word forecasting. These companies make outlooks right across the line. They draw them out, and they make bold predictions based on every step they make. Sony is not here by accident. Sony is not here because they don't know what happened. They know exactly what's going on because they hire people. In doing so, they see the charts, they see the outlines, they got the meetings, they do the daily talks. We're here. And let's begin. Hirai became president and CEO of Sony on April of 2012. On April 1st, 2018, Hirai stepped down as president and CEO. He was a chairman of the Sony Corporation, Sony Interactive Entertainment. He, along with the committee, having meetings about the direction and plans for Sony, board of directors, and which he was head of. He was head of and was elected to represent shareholders. Uh-oh, there goes the word shareholders. Oh, legal, what does stock have anything to do with gaming, we said. What does it have to do? Why would you show this? We're talking about gaming. Y'all don't even know what this dude's job was. Y'all don't even know what this dude's job was. He was head of that. It's important to understand your stock. It's important because that has everything to do with all your divisions. It has everything to do with the healthiness of a company. So he was also the CEO of Sony Entertainment as well, as Sony Interactive Entertainment. Becoming the chairman of Sony, note that in 1997, Hirai was credited on his first ever completed video game. In 1997, y'all. So out of fairness, Kaz was a casual, a severe casual. He also was an overseer of all development, production, and marketing activities for Sony's online entertainment, personal computer, the VIOs, the mobile devices, the Walkman, the Xperia's network services, Sony Entertainment Network. He was replaced by Andrew House as president and CEO And we'll talk about that soon. On February 1st, 2012, Sony announced that Hirai had been appointed as president and chief executive officer. He was appointed to the board of directors of the shareholder meetings on June 27th of 2012. Now this is where things get interesting. Keep in mind Andrew House as well. On February 2nd, 2018, Sony announced that Rob will be stepping down as president and CEO starting at April 1st, 2018 to be replaced by, y'all know it, Kenichiro Yoshida. Ross stayed as the company's chairman and served on board of directors, which is all about shareholders, to help transition the leadership to Yoshida. Who is Yoshida? One may ask. He is the past representative corporate executive officer, Sony's corporation since April of 2014. Now check this, and is president and chief financial officer since April of 2018. So basically, a CFO does is directly assist with strategic and tactical matters relating to budget management, cost benefit, analysts, forecasting, there's my word, forecasting needs, and securing of new funding. Out of all these descriptions, the one that's the most puzzling to show itself is the word forecasting. Meaning what's the potential of the company and goals within the company. The forecast determines where you are at any given time. So where is Sony? Where is Sony right now? And now that we know that Sony knew where they would be going, it's not hard to understand where they're at. It takes a little bit of time to go back to find out how they got here. But while I'll be playing this game just a little bit, not doing too much, I wanted to do this in honor of today. Move around a little bit, direct myself, get right, and just keep things interesting. So if you see the footage on pause or just standing still, you know why. The company had delayed the release of its 2016-2017 guidance until Tuesday after the twin earthquakes halted production on image sensors. Image sensors are a main vital production for Sony and is a key player into the vital movement of Sony. The company had counted a steady growth in image sensors which are used in Apple's iPhones to drive its turnaround after it pulled back from consumer electronic businesses such as laptops and televisions. But the disaster means Sony will no longer be seeing bigger losses in its image sensor division. But the disaster means that Sony will now see bigger losses. And its image sensor division, even as restructuring efforts will help to return its underperforming mobile phone division to profitability. So we know that no matter what Sony has been doing, nothing has been going right for them. Nothing. The slowdown of the iPhone sales at Apple had already hurt the image sensor business in the fiscal fourth quarter through March, when the group booked a net loss of 88.3 yen. Yoshida, Sony's chief financial officer, key hint right there, said he expects demand for image sensors used in mobile phones to pick up from the second half of the financial year. Analysts also expect the recovery to coincide with Apple's launch of the iPhone 7. So I wanted to make sure y'all get a good timeline of that. We're not going to be so, detailed, but you can go back and look up the years of the iPhone 7 and you have a direct year of this struggling situation with Sony. And even as the quake damaged her sales of image sensors and digital cameras, Yoshida said they expect strong growth to continue in the PlayStation gaming division. And this is where all the people lose their minds at. And this is where all the confusion and people who really don't understand what's going on. In addition to the success of the PlayStation 4 console, Sony had plans to launch its virtual reality headset in October at a price of $399. Some analysts say Sony's forecast is overly conservative. Now, why would they say that? We're going to get into that more in just a moment. A caution that is echoed by Japanese manufacturers, including Toyota. So you see that this is an industry situation with Sony that far supersedes their boundaries of corporation. These are Japanese companies themselves looking at Sony, talking about Sony, and the moves that Sony do. The Japanese companies released 2016 to 2017 forecast. Remember that word. For recurring profits that came in 12% below market consensus, a gap that has not been observed since the global financial crisis of 2008, according to Goldman Sachs. So I want to repeat that. That gap has not been observed since the global financial crisis of 2008, people. Which leads us to this, right? Which leads us to this. In 2008, right? Sony's to trim 8,000 jobs and reduce investment. It said, and reduce investment. The Japanese consumer electronics giant said on Tuesday, and this is December 9th of 2008, people. 2008. That it would eliminate 8,000 jobs and rein its planned investment in reaction to the global economy slowdown. Sony, which had already announced scattered cost-saving measures, blamed rapid deterioration in the global economic outlook and the strength of the Japanese currency for the cuts. So see, Sony can't even compete with the global market as their money worth can't hold up with all the other currency in the world. So they're having an issue with keeping their pockets strong throughout the world. The measures combined with a bleak outlook from the Sony rival Samsung and news that Japan's economy had contracted more than initially thought during the third quarter highlighted how much Asian economies were suffering because of the financial crisis, now increasingly also an economic crisis that began in the United States last year. The number of job cuts in Japan will increase day by day, said Tomoko Fuji, head of economics and strategy within Sony. How much Asian economies were suffering because of the financial crisis, now increasingly also an economy crisis that began once again in the United States. These initiatives are the response to a sudden and rapid change, here we go, in the global economic environment, says Sony. So this is Sony saying that, which has 160,000 employees. Sony intends to save more than 100 billion yen, which is equivalent to $1.1 billion. That's it. Look how weak the yen is. You have to get 100 billion yen just to have 1.1 billion US dollars. A year through the measures, which includes closing several plants. Okay, Sony makes those thin flat screen TVs. But this next number looks bad in any resolution, $1 billion. Today, the Japanese company said it lost that much money in the last fiscal year. It's Sony's first annual loss since 1995, people. But its products have already been losing ground for years, they say. The one-time profitable Music King got bumped on the head by Apple's iPod. Then Sony's PlayStation 3 undersold Nintendo's Wii by half. Now its TV sales stand second to Samsung. Sony blames its losses on the global economy and a stronger yen, which jacks up the price of every Japanese export. The company thinks next year it will get worse, and in so losing more than $1 billion. CEO Howard Stringer has ordered cost-cutting. Sony's losing 16,000 workers. several factories, and things may get worse. In 2009, why Sony's reporting a $1 billion loss. $2009, people, $1 billion loss. So what does that mean? Think about what I just said, right? They had sold off everything just to make 1.1 billion in 2008. In 2009, they only saved 100,000 of that. If we were to talk about the savings, they only saved 100,000 of that, because 1 billion of that's gone. The classic article, how Sony is turning into a ghost of Japan and around the world. It's crazy how this article right here in 2012 painted a picture that would just really wake up the eyes of people who were curious about the standpoint of Sony. It talks about how Sony is no longer in the shops. We don't have any Sony products in our shop anymore, says an owner apologetically. Many electronic shops in town do not sell Sony nowadays because Sony itself has pretty much stopped placing products in tiny retail shops like ours. A few years ago, Sony shop stores specializing in their products and small electronic dealers carrying most of the Sony line could be found in most shop areas. Major train sections. There are not many of them left now. Sony used to be synonymous with Japan during the late 1980s and early 90s, when it seemed like the land of the rising sun would eclipse the world. It also seemed like Sony would become the one brand to rule them all. But in 2012, people, the image of Sony has faded, just as the image of Japan has. Sony has shadowed itself in the land of the setting sun, in its own home. In its own home. Now, quick, can you imagine Microsoft being shadowed in its own country? Is there a single bullet theory that works? Many people claim to know the answer, but it seems like the people who really have the answers are the local mom and pop stores who used to sell Sony products, and the people who once worked there or worked for Sony at its peak. Sony is not doing very well. According to the New York Times, it's the company's financial year that ended in March of 2012. It's projected a record net loss of $455 billion, the equivalent of only 5.7 billion US dollars. It was Sony's worst loss ever. Add that up to the billion that they just lost. So we know that there's a loss now of 6 to 7 billion within those years. Notice I jacked up, it went up 3 more years, y'all. So it's got to be at least another billion in there. It easily. So we know that from the previous loss. So you're looking at maybe 6 to 7 billion. That still has to be made up. Has to be made up, people. Sony's worst loss ever as an additional tax expense hurt the company's already battered but heavy losses in the television businesses. A strong yen and natural disasters also claim a lot of the mess. Some would even say that Sony is already living a zombie and that the firm won't survive. Rumors are already coming out that basically Sony is already dead. They're just sitting around here dead, walking around. These are comments made within their own culture. The contrast of one store, which is almost a Sony graveyard at the Sony building located in Ginza. Once the most expensive and luxurious area in Tokyo, the Sony showrooms are immaculate and have almost 5 floors of space. The irony is that almost every floor now is empty on a Friday afternoon. What is meant to be the Sony showroom turns out to be a Sony ghost town. You get these USA cats that go to Japan and they're blinded. Like a lot of you donkeys out there that are blinded. When we try to tell you what's going on, when we try to tell you things, and y'all don't even want to listen. Yo, you sound like this. Does this sound? Does this sound? Does this sound? relative. Neil, who is 20 years old from the USA, was also taking a walk inside the fancy Sony showrooms with his parents. Oh, I came here because I love video games. I'm a total video game geek, and I think Sony PlayStations are really reliable. Microsoft and the Xbox break down a lot compared to the PlayStation 3. Sony is a well-known brand, and you get what you pay for. I wonder what he's saying today. Here goes another guy. Well, I think Sony is not even competing anymore. When it comes to televisions, everybody buys Korean TVs. They're cheaper, bigger, and the difference in quality is not much. They love that, don't they? They always love to talk about how one company, whether they do real great, it's never that much of a big deal in comparison. They love to say that, right? However, for cameras, videos, and digital media, Sony still has many technical products. Today, I came here because I needed to buy a computer. Sony is quality. Japanese people love Sony. Yasushi, who is 51, and his wife, Yasuko, which is 50, were also among the very few Japanese visitors of the Sony showroom in the television center. Sony is quality. Japanese people love Sony. I think Sony is still on top, commented Mr. Yasushi before sliding away to look at some new thin television models. So as he was talking about Sony and how great Sony was, he was quick to just walk away and go look at other TVs as if it was nothing. As if it was absolutely nothing. However, when you walk out of the Ginza and out of the Sony showroom and walk past the mega electronic retailers like Big Camera and began focus on local small retailers, you find a surprising amount of anti-Sony sentiment. Of course, once you get down to the real, get down here in these streets, the real comes out. The feelings go away and the real comes out. This isn't good. Sony promotes itself as an international brand, but almost 30% of its sales for all products are said to come from Japan. By alienating the small retailers, Sony may have cost itself consumers' loyalty and sales. Only Sony really knows. The stores we spoke with say almost the same thing. We stopped dealing in Sony products a decade ago. There are many Japanese products that sell well, but in my shop, Sharp is doing the best so far. In my shop, I do not sell Korean products, and the reason for this is because I am embarrassed. Afterwards, when there is a problem, I mean maintenance, repair, or arrangements, Japanese products are easy to take care of, and they need to take less care of too. It is true that Korean products are becoming good as well, but for me, I prefer dealing with Japanese products. But well, when we say they are Japanese, in the end of the day, many made are overseas, but you know, they are still made by Japanese companies with Japanese technology. He says this very proudly. Nowadays, Sony doesn't sell very well. "10 or 15 years ago, Sony products used to sell very well. Nowadays, Sony doesn't sell very well. Sony decided to sell at the market value, and then they started selling on the internet directly. Sony caters to big retailers and has been disconnected from the small retailers. So now you know where Sony comes from. Sony never came from the big retailers. They want to look like they're big time. But like the gangsters say, you look like you big time, you play like you big time, you die big time. No one take them anymore in a small shop," she explained. "The Walkman was the best hit I remember. We sold many of them when they came out." A middle manager at Sony on background recalls the idea age. You remember him? But if not, we'll get to him too. They decided to streamline the company and do a massive reconstruction. When we say reconstruction in Japanese, we really mean get rid of people. He put together an early retirement plan that strongly encouraged people to use it. Well, that didn't generate a lot of good feelings. When a company starts promoting early retirement, most people take that as a sign to get out while they still can. And many did. Maybe the idea was that by getting rid of The middle-aged people and older employees, they encourage innovation and bring in some young blood. The effect, was more like shooting yourself in the foot. I don't know how to say his real name. I mean, as far as my pronunciation, but you know the guy. Nobuyuki Idea, CEO, supervillain that killed the mighty Sony. It turns out that Mrs. Nakayama is very astute. Former Sony executives and current employees blame the fall of the firm on the loss of brain power, good employees during the reign of Nobuyuki from 1999 to 2005. Idea was the first Sony CEO to rise up entirely from the management background, and in the Who Killed Sony genre of books and articles, he is regularly the prime suspect. So what I want to tell y'all is, in the culture of the Japanese culture within Sony, there's tons of books about this guy on how he did Sony, right? And how Sony, the people and the fans of Sony, are continually of a lack of knowledge that will never let be so true, right? They write books about him. They don't want nobody to not ever know about what this guy did. And if Sony never rises back up to power, they want to make sure their culture knows who was responsible for it. The representative of a major European investor in Sony recalls his meeting with Idea very unfavorable. I came to Japan to talk to Mr. Idea about our growing concerns with Sony's direction. We had dinner together. It could be Mr. Idai. I don't know. It could be Mr. Idai. I wanted to talk about profit margins. He wanted to talk about the wine we were having. He struck me as a clueless. Listen to this. He struck me as a clueless. When the investor pointed out that Sony's operating profits on electronic products were roughly 2 to 4%, and that Samsung was making similar products at a 30% profit margin, Idai hushed him by reportedly saying, "They make the parts for our products. We put them together. It's the difference between a steel maker and an automobile maker. We make automobiles." The investor apparently countered, "Well, I've got news for you. The people you laid off from the car plant are now working at the steel mill. And soon the steel mills will be building cars with your technology." The warning was not heeded. It was 2004 when they last met. And while the iPod was increasingly becoming the to-go platform for mobile music and multimedia contents, Sony, Idai, didn't take it seriously. When Sony announced that it will be appointing Howard Stringer to be the new CEO in 2005, and we know what happened to him, another CEO that's no longer there, the investor sent Stringer a message and offered to support us via Sony's Japan office. Stringer was in charge of the company for several months before the investor heard of Stringer himself that the message had not gone through. The investor drastically reduced their interest in Sony. We still have shares in the company, so I don't want to say much more. But, watch this. But there is much more, but it is clear and much more to me about what to say in 2004 that Sony was a company at war with itself, and that the seeds of its downfall had already been planted by Mr. Idai and nurtured by his cronies, and that they were quickly taking root. Y'all want to get to more interesting facts as y'all pound that we talk crazy when we talk about the Japanese market and how it simply sticks together for the lack of content on other stage performing events, communities, and products. Our common point in the analysis of the 15 Japanese business leaders when I was investigating in my book is their leadership. These 15 companies have a strong leader with a strong mind. The second thing these managers have in common, he added, is that they kept the DNA. or the root of their management from the beginning. These companies succeeded because they managed to keep their DNA along the way as what? Japanese companies. The Japanese should not copy the American or Anglo-Saxon business models. There you have it. The mystery is facts on Di-RREC Gaming. Now you have it. It has been confirmed that yes, it was plotted and thoroughly thought of to do no support for anything outside of Sony. You have it right there. So don't ever come back talking about people who say stuff like this is wrong. It is correct. Mr. Matari, the leader of Canon, for example, said that many times. The Japanese should not copy the American or Anglo-Saxon business models, and Japanese companies should have their own way. However, in some ways, many managers say that the Japanese should learn from the American industries. For example, Mr. Matari said that he learned about the cash flow business management from the Americans when he stayed in the USA. He learned to use the cash flow in a more efficient way, but he also stressed that on the Japanese management style, he also stressed the importance of the inheritance of the DNA, which Canon handed during 60 years after establishment. Before, the Japanese consumers loved the Japanese products, but recently the Japanese markets became an open market, and also the Japanese citizens' tendency is changing. Before, that's the reason why the Japanese are having a hard time. They're having a hard time adjusting. And while the global market is increasingly growing, even Korea and China can produce such high quality products. Before, the Japanese companies succeeded to make high quality or advanced technology, but recently the spread of innovation moving quite fast, so they are losing their leadership in that field. Hasegawa explains, the technological leaps are so fast and furious that spending huge amounts of money, right? And on the research and on the development. Guess what, people? They say it may no longer make any sense. Now, does that make any sense? Think about that. Is Sony what it used to be? Urban legends say not so. An owner of an electronic shop in Machida may understand Sony's problems better than the financial experts. Because he was selling Toshibas, Hitachi, Sharps, National, Panasonic, and Sony products in Japan for over 40 years. He said that the quality of Sony has definitely fallen over the years. Samsung surpassed Sony, especially in the field of television. Which comes up to Sony's 3-year turnaround playing bets on cameras and PlayStation. Part 1 is done. Part 2 is next. This is the new legal representing Di-RREC Gaming, and we will be back on this grand stage day of when Kaz retired from Sony. We out of here. Peace.